The distant sound of gunshots echoed across the Montana territory as Lillian Zimmerman clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders, her hazel eyes scanning the dusty horizon for any sign of pursuit. The year was 1882, and her past was chasing her faster than her weary legs could carry her away from it. The small mining town of Copper Creek appeared like a mirage in the distance, its weathered buildings shimmering in the afternoon heat. Lillian had been walking for 3 days, her boots worn through, her lips cracked from dehydration. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and a small pouch of coins sewn into her petticoat, barely enough to start over, but it was all she had. She stumbled on a loose rock, her exhaustion finally getting the best of her. The world tilted sideways as she fell, her palms scraping against the rough dirt road. A cloud of dust rose around her, clinging to her tear-streaked face and once fine dress that was now stained beyond recognition. "Whoa there, miss, are you all right?" The deep voice startled her, and Lillian's head snapped up to see a man atop a chestnut stallion. His broad shoulders blocked the setting sun, casting his face in shadow beneath a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy, by the look of his worn leather chaps and the lariat coiled at his saddle. "I'm fine," she lied, pushing herself up on shaky arms. "Just lost my footing." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. As he stepped closer, Lillian could see his face clearly weathered by sun and wind, but kind. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and a few days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. "You don't look fine," he said bluntly, but without unkindness. "You look like you've been through hell." Lillian attempted to smooth her skirts, painfully aware of how disheveled she appeared. "I'm just passing through," she said, her voice hoarse. "On my way to Copper Creek. Then we're heading the same way." He offered a canteen. "I'm Finn Hayes. I run the Hayes Ranch outside of town." She hesitated before taking the water, gulping it gratefully. "Lillian Zimmerman," she replied, using her maiden name for the first time in years. "Thank you for the water, Mr. Hayes, but I should continue on my way. On foot." "It's another 5 miles to town and the sun's going down. Nights get cold out here." He studied her face, noting the purple bruise partially hidden by her hair. His jaw tightened, but he made no comment on it. "My ranch is just over that ridge. You can clean up there, have a hot meal, and I'll take you into town tomorrow." Suspicion flooded through Lillian. Men with kind offers had proven dangerous in her experience. "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, would skin me alive if I left a lady alone on the road." His smile was disarming, genuine. "She's a formidable woman of 60 who rules my house with an iron fist. You'd be perfectly proper under her watch." Something in his steady gaze told Lillian she could trust him. Or perhaps it was simply that she had no choice. Night was falling, and she couldn't go back to where she'd come from. "Very well, Mr. Hayes, I accept your offer." Finn nodded, leading his horse closer. "Can you ride?" "Yes," she answered, grateful for the riding lessons of her youth. He helped her into the saddle, his hands respectfully positioned at her waist, then swung up behind her. Lillian stiffened at the proximity, but his arms reached around her only to take the reins, maintaining a proper distance. "Hold on," he instructed, and they set off toward the Hayes Ranch. The Hayes homestead was larger than Lillian had expected, a sturdy 2-story house of hewn logs with glass windows, a wide front porch, and several outbuildings. Lamplight glowed warmly through the windows, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. A plump woman with silver-streaked hair emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Finn Hayes, you bring home strays of all kinds, but this is the first time you've brought a young lady." Her voice was stern, but her eyes twinkled. Finn dismounted, then carefully helped Lillian down. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Lillian Zimmerman. She's on her way to Copper Creek and needs a place to stay tonight." Mrs. Abernathy's keen eyes took in Lillian's bedraggled appearance, lingering briefly on the bruise at her temple. Her expression softened. "Well, you're just in time for supper, Miss Zimmerman, but first, let's get you cleaned up." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, with polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and colorful quilts draped over chairs. Mrs. Abernathy led Lillian upstairs to a bedroom that clearly belonged to a woman, though it had a disused air about it. This was Finn's sister's room, Mrs. Abernathy explained, lighting an oil lamp. Eliza moved to Denver 2 years ago after she married. I've kept it ready for when she visits. She opened a wardrobe. You look to be about her size. I'm sure she wouldn't mind you borrowing something clean. Lillian stood awkwardly in the center of the room. You're very kind, but I don't wish to be a burden. Mrs. Abernathy clicked her tongue. Nonsense. Now I'll draw you a bath. Dinner's in an hour. Once alone, Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. She hadn't felt safe in so long that the sensation was almost foreign. The bath that Mrs. Abernathy prepared was heavenly hot water scented with lavender. Lillian scrubbed away days of travel and fear, watching the water turn gray with dust and memories. She selected the simplest dress from Eliza's wardrobe, a modest blue cotton with small white flowers. It fit well enough, though Eliza was taller. Lillian braided her damp auburn hair and pinched some color into her pale cheeks before making her way downstairs. In the dining room, Finn stood when she entered. For a moment, he seemed speechless, his blue eyes widening slightly. You clean up nice, Miss Zimmerman, he finally said, pulling out a chair for her. Thank you for the loan of your sister's dress, she replied, settling into her seat. Mrs. Abernathy brought out a hearty meal: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Lillian couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten so well. She tried to maintain proper table manners despite her hunger. So what takes you to Copper Creek? Finn asked, passing her the butter. Lillian tensed. I'm hoping to find work there. What kind of work do you do? I was a teacher once, she said softly, but I'll take any respectable position. Finn nodded thoughtfully. The town's growing. The silver mines brought in a lot of people. I'm sure there are opportunities. They ate in companionable silence for a while until Lillian gathered her courage. May I ask what kind of ranch you run, Mr. Hayes? His face brightened. Horses, mainly. I breed and train them. Got some cattle too, but horses are my passion. As he spoke about his ranch, his eyes came alive with enthusiasm. Lillian found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about the different breeds and training methods. It felt so normal, this conversation over dinner, that for a moment she forgot why she was running. After dinner, Finn excused himself to check on a mare about to foal, and Mrs. Abernathy showed Lillian to a small sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth. He's a good man, Mrs. Abernathy said suddenly, startling Lillian from her thoughts. Mr. Hayes. Yes, known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His parents, God rest their souls, built this place from nothing. Finn was just 23 when they both died of influenza 5 years ago, took over the ranch, raised his sister, never complained once. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes were warm with affection. Not many like him left. Lillian nodded politely, unsure how to respond. He seems very kind. He is that, Mrs. Abernathy agreed. Too kind sometimes, been taken advantage of more than once. Her gaze sharpened. I hope you're not the type to do that, Miss Zimmerman. No, madam, Lillian said firmly. I'll be out of your way tomorrow. The older woman's expression softened. That's not what I meant, dear. Whatever you're running from, and don't bother denying it, I recognize that. Look, you're safe here for as long as you need. Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you. Lillian slept deeply for the first time in weeks, lulled by the safety of the Hayes home and the exhaustion of her journey. She woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the distant sound of horses neighing after dressing in her own clothes, which Mrs. Abernathy had kindly laundered overnight. Lillian made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but the back door stood open. She followed the sound of activity to the barn, where she found Finn brushing down a magnificent black stallion. Good morning, she called softly, not wanting to startle horse or man. Finn turned, a smile breaking across his face. Good morning, Miss Zimmerman. Sleep well. Better than I have in a long time, she admitted. Your home is very peaceful. Glad to hear it. He patted the horse's neck. This is Midnight, best cutting horse in 3 territories. The stallion snorted, as if in agreement, making Lillian laugh. The sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed freely. Would you like to see the rest of the ranch before breakfast? Finn offered. Lillian nodded, following him through the barn where a dozen horses occupied stalls. In a separate area, a beautiful chestnut mare lay in fresh straw, a tiny foal nestled against her side. She delivered in the night, Finn explained proudly. A healthy filly. Lillian approached carefully, entranced by the newborn's spindly legs and large, curious eyes. She's beautiful. Would you like to name her? Finn asked suddenly. Lillian looked up, startled. Me, but surely I'm terrible at naming, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Last foal I named ended up as Spot because I couldn't think of anything better. Lillian studied the little filly with her reddish coat and white blaze running down her face. Hope, she said finally. Her name should be Hope. Finn's eyes softened. Hope it is. After a breakfast of flapjacks and strong coffee, Finn hitched a wagon to take Lillian into town. Mrs. Abernathy packed her a basket with sandwiches and apple pie, fussing over her like a mother hen. You come back and visit us, you hear? The housekeeper instructed, giving Lillian a fierce hug. Anytime you need a home-cooked meal or just some company. Touched by the woman's kindness, Lillian promised she would. The journey to Copper Creek took less than an hour with the wagon. As they approached the town, Lillian's anxiety returned. The street was bustling with miners, shopkeepers, and townsfolk going about their business. Where would you like me to take you? Finn asked as they entered the main street. Lillian hesitated. Is there a boarding house for women? Finn nodded. Mrs. Calloway runs a respectable place for ladies. It's just past the church. The boarding house was a tidy 2-story building with white curtains in the windows and a small flower garden out front. Mrs. Calloway, a stern-faced widow with kind eyes, showed Lillian a small but clean room that cost $2 a week. I require references, Mrs. Calloway stated firmly after showing the room. Lillian's heart sank. I don't have any. I'm new to town. Mrs. Calloway frowned, clearly about to refuse when Finn stepped forward. I can vouch for Miss Zimmerman, Mrs. Calloway. She stayed at my ranch last night, chaperoned by Mrs. Abernathy and is of impeccable character. The landlady's eyebrows rose slightly. Well, if Finn Hayes is vouching for you, that's good enough for me. But I run a respectable house, Miss Zimmerman. No gentlemen callers in rooms, no coming in after 9 o'clock, and no spirits allowed. Of course, Lillian agreed quickly. Thank you. After paying for 2 weeks in advance, she found herself standing on the boardwalk with Finn, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye. Thank you for everything, Mr. Hayes. Your kindness has meant more than you know. He tipped his hat. It was my pleasure, Miss Zimmerman. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask. Actually, she said, gathering her courage, do you know of any work in town? I need to find employment as soon as possible. Finn thought for a moment. The general store might need help. And I heard the school board is looking for a teacher for the fall term. Lillian's eyes lit up. A teaching position. Where would I apply? Town hall. Ask for Mr. Daniels, the school board president. Finn smiled at her enthusiasm. You said you were a teacher before. Yes, in St. Louis. I taught for 3 years. It felt like a lifetime ago. Well then, Mr. Daniels would be a fool not to hire you. His voice was warm with confidence. After Finn departed, promising to check on her in a few days, Lillian set out to find work. The general store had no positions available, nor did the dressmaker or the hotel. Discouraged but determined, she made her way to the town hall. Mr. Daniels, a portly man with spectacles, listened to her request with interest. We do need a teacher for the fall term, but school doesn't start for another month. Can you wait that long? I need immediate employment, sir, Lillian admitted. Perhaps there's something temporary I could do until the school term begins. Mr. Daniels scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, the school needs a thorough cleaning and some books need cataloging. It's not much, but I could pay you $2 a week for that until the term starts. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was a start. I accept, Lillian said gratefully. When may I begin? Tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock sharp. For the next week, Lillian settled into a routine. During the days, she scrubbed the schoolhouse from top to bottom, washing windows, polishing desks, and organizing books. In the evenings, she mended clothes for extra money, a skill her mother had insisted she learn. She saw Finn twice that week. The first time was by chance. She was carrying packages from the general store when he rode into town for supplies. He immediately dismounted to help her, insisting on carrying her parcels back to the boarding house. The second time, he came specifically to check on her, bringing a basket of fresh eggs and vegetables from his garden. Mrs. Abernathy sent these, he explained, though Lillian suspected the visit was his idea. They walked together through town, and Finn listened attentively as she described her progress at the schoolhouse. "You seem happy when you talk about teaching," he observed. Lillian smiled. "I love it. Helping children discover the world through books, seeing their faces light up when they understand something new, there's nothing like it." "You'll be a wonderful teacher for this town," Finn said, his blue eyes warm with admiration. As they passed the saloon, a raucous group of cowboys emerged, laughing loudly. Lillian instinctively tensed, stepping closer to Finn. One of the men, tall with a scar across his cheek, glanced their way. His eyes narrowed as they lingered on Lillian. "You all right?" Finn asked quietly, noticing her discomfort. "Yes, I just don't care for saloons," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Finn nodded, but his sharp eyes hadn't missed how she'd paled at the sight of the scarred cowboy. He guided her across the street, placing himself between her and the men. That night, Lillian's dreams were haunted by faces from her past. She woke in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. Moonlight streamed through her window as she sat up, reminding herself that she was safe in Copper Creek. But for how long? The next morning, Lillian was arranging books in the schoolhouse when the door creaked open. Expecting Mr. Daniels for his weekly inspection, she turned with a smile that froze on her face. The scarred cowboy from the saloon stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light. "Well, well," he drawled, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "If it ain't Mrs. Edward Blackstone herself." Lillian's blood ran cold. "You're mistaken, sir. My name is Zimmerman." The man chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Nah, I ain't mistaken. Worked for your husband 2 years back on his ranch in Wyoming. Hard man to forget." He moved closer. "You're a hard woman to forget, too." Lillian backed away, her hands trembling. "Please leave. Your husband's offering a mighty fine reward for information on your whereabouts," he continued, ignoring her request. $500. That's a lot of money for a working man." "Whatever he's told you, it isn't true," Lillian said, desperately searching for an escape route. The cowboy's eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Don't much care what's true, care about that reward money." He reached for her arm. "Now, you're coming with me, nice and quiet." Lillian grabbed the closest thing at hand, a heavy geography textbook, and swung it with all her might at his head. The cowboy stumbled backward, cursing. As she darted around him toward the door, his hand caught her skirt, yanking her back so violently she lost her balance. She hit the floor hard, the wind knocked from her lungs. Before she could scream, his calloused hand clamped over her mouth. "That wasn't very ladylike," he growled, his face inches from hers. The schoolhouse door burst open, flooding the room with sunlight. Finn Hayes stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous as he took in the scene before him. "Take your hands off her," he commanded, his voice dangerously quiet. The scarred cowboy straightened, releasing Lillian. "This ain't your business, Hayes. This woman belongs to Edward Blackstone. She's his wife, and I'm taking her back to him." Finn's eyes never left the man as he moved into the room. "Miss Zimmerman doesn't belong to anyone. Now step away from her." A tense silence filled the schoolhouse. Then the cowboy smirked, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "You willing to die for another man's wife, Hayes?" Faster than Lillian could blink, Finn drew his own revolver. "Are you willing to die for Edward Blackstone's money?" The standoff lasted only seconds before the cowboy raised his hands slowly. "Ain't worth getting shot over," he muttered, backing toward the door. "But Blackstone will come for her himself once he knows where she is, and he ain't as reasonable as me." "Get out," Finn said coldly, "and spread the word anyone who tries to harm Miss Zimmerman answers to me." After the cowboy left, Lillian collapsed into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. Finn holstered his weapon and knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Finn admitted. "I was coming to invite you to Sunday dinner at the ranch, saw him follow you in here and waited a few minutes. When he didn't come out, I got suspicious." His eyes searched her face. "Is it true? Are you married to Edward Blackstone?" Lillian closed her eyes briefly. "Yes, or I was. I left him 3 weeks ago." Finn didn't press for more. Instead, he helped her to her feet. "Come on, you can't stay here now. Where can I go? If Edward discovers I'm in Copper Creek, he won't stop until he finds me." Finn's jaw set determinedly. "My ranch, no one will touch you there." Back at the Hayes Ranch, Mrs. Abernathy took one look at Lillian's tear-streaked face and ushered her into the kitchen, settling her with a cup of strong tea laced with whiskey. Finn paced the room, his face grim. "You don't have to tell us anything you don't want to, Mrs. Abernathy assured Lillian, patting her hand. "No, you deserve the truth," Lillian said, drawing a shaky breath. "After all you've done for me." She took a sip of tea, gathering her courage. "I married Edward Blackstone 4 years ago. I was 20, naive and flattered by his attention. He was wealthy, charming, and promised me the world." Her voice turned bitter. "What he didn't promise was that he would turn into a monster once we were married." Finn stopped pacing, his eyes dark with anger. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question, but Lillian nodded anyway. At first it was just words, criticism, controlling behavior. Then came the slaps, which turned into punches. Each time he would apologize, swear it would never happen again. Her fingers tightened around the teacup, but it always did, and it got worse. Mrs. Abernathy made a sympathetic noise. "Why didn't you leave sooner, dear?" "I tried once," Lillian whispered. 2 years ago. He found me in Cheyenne, dragged me back, and..." She couldn't continue, her throat closing on the memory. "You don't need to say more," Finn said gently. "The important thing is you got away this time." Lillian looked up at him, her hazel eyes swimming with tears. "But for how long? Edward has connections, money. That man today was just the beginning." "Let me worry about Blackstone," Finn said firmly. "You're staying here where it's safe." For the next 2 weeks, Lillian remained at the Hayes Ranch. Mr. Daniels arranged for her teaching materials to be sent out so she could prepare for the upcoming school term. Despite Finn's protests, she insisted on earning her keep, helping Mrs. Abernathy with household chores and even learning to cook a few simple meals. Every morning, Finn rode the perimeter of his property, checking for signs of trespassers. Every evening, he cleaned his Winchester rifle and kept it by the door. The ranch hands were alerted to watch for strangers, though Finn didn't share Lillian's full situation with them. Slowly, Lillian began to relax in the safety of the ranch. She spent time in the garden, read books from Finn's modest library, and visited the new foal, Hope, who grew stronger each day. Sometimes Finn would invite her to ride with him to check on the herds, and she found herself looking forward to these outings, to the easy conversation and comfortable silence they shared. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Finn finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Why Copper Creek? Of all the places you could have run to, why here?" Lillian's gaze remained on the distant mountains. "My mother grew up near here. She used to tell me stories about how beautiful it was." A sad smile touched her lips. "She died when I was 16. I always promised her I'd see it someday." Finn nodded thoughtfully. "What was your mother's name?" "Margaret." "Margaret Wilson, before she married my father." Finn's eyebrows shot up. "Margaret Wilson, was your grandfather Henry Wilson, by chance?" Lillian turned to him in surprise. "Yes, how did you know?" Finn laughed, a sound of genuine delight. "Well, I'll be. Your grandfather sold this land to my father 30 years ago. They stayed friends until your grandfather died. My father always spoke highly of him." "Really?" Lillian was astonished by the connection. "Mother always said grandfather was a good man, though I never met him." "He was," Finn confirmed. "Strong but fair, generous to a fault. My father said he sold this land at half its worth because he wanted to see a family build something lasting here." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. "It seems fitting, then, that I found my way back to a place my family once called home." Finn's hand covered hers where it rested on the porch railing. "Maybe it wasn't chance that brought you here. Maybe you were always meant to find your way back." The warmth of his hand, the gentleness in his voice, stirred something in Lillian's heart that she'd thought long dead hope. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life here, teaching the town's children, perhaps building a small house of her own. A life where Edward Blackstone couldn't reach her. But reality intruded harshly 3 days later when one of the ranch hands galloped in with news from town. "Mr. Hayes, There's a fancy Easterner asking questions about a woman matching Miss Zimmerman's description. Offering money for information. Finn's expression hardened. What's he look like? Tall, well-dressed. Has a silver-headed cane and a nasty temper. Threw a glass at Mary at the hotel when she wouldn't tell him anything. Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. Edward, she whispered. He's found me. That night, after a tense dinner, Finn found Lillian in the barn. She was standing in Hope's stall, stroking the foal's soft muzzle, her expression distant. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly, leaning against the stall door. Lillian didn't look up. "I'm trying to decide where to go next." "Go," Finn straightened. "You're not going anywhere." Now she did look at him, her eyes sad but determined. "I have to, Finn. I can't bring Edward's wrath down on you and this town. He won't stop until he finds me." "Then let him come," Finn said fiercely. "Let him try to take you." Lillian shook her head. "You don't understand. Edward is dangerous. He's killed men for less than interfering with what he considers his property." "You're not property," Finn insisted, entering the stall to stand before her. "You're a person, Lillian. A strong, brave, beautiful person who deserves to be free." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm not strong, I'm terrified." "Being afraid doesn't mean you're not strong. It means you've been through something terrible and survived." Finn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and brushed a tear from her cheek. "Let me help you fight this battle." Lillian looked into his earnest blue eyes and saw something she'd been missing her entire life, someone who saw her true worth. Not as a possession or an ornament, but as a person deserving of respect and protection. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Finn's hand cupped her cheek gently. "Because in the short time I've known you, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible. Because you deserve a chance at happiness, and because I'd never forgive myself if I let you face this alone." The tenderness in his voice undid her. Lillian stepped into his arms, burying her face against his chest as sobs racked her body. Finn held her carefully, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances as she finally released years of pent-up fear and pain. When her tears subsided, she didn't pull away. Instead, she listened to the steady beat of his heart, finding comfort in its rhythm. "I'm afraid I'm not clean enough for someone like you," she whispered, the admission torn from the deepest part of her soul. "What Edward did to me, the things he made me do, they've stained me in ways you can't imagine." Finn's arms tightened around her protectively. "Then let me wash away what they did," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not with demands or expectations, but with patience and understanding, with a safe place where you can heal." Lillian lifted her face to his, seeing nothing but sincerity in his expression. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a gentle, questioning kiss. Finn responded with equal gentleness, his hands remaining respectfully at her waist. The kiss was brief but full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. When they parted, Lillian's cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were clear and determined. "I won't run anymore," she decided. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Finn smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. "Together," he agreed. The next morning, Finn gathered his most trusted ranch hands and explained the situation. To a man, they pledged to stand with him against Blackstone. "Ain't right for a man to treat a woman that way," declared old Pete, who'd worked for the Hayes family for 20 years. "Miss Lillian's good folk. We'll see she stays safe." Mrs. Abernathy took charge of securing the house, checking that all windows and doors could be locked from the inside. Lillian was never left alone, always accompanied by either Finn, Mrs. Abernathy, or one of the trusted hands. For 3 days, they waited, tension mounting with each sunset. Lillian tried to focus on preparing her lessons for the upcoming school term, but her nerves were stretched thin. Each time a rider approached the ranch, her heart would race until they could confirm it wasn't Edward. On the 4th day, Sheriff Wilson from Copper Creek rode out to the ranch, his expression grim as Finn met him on the porch. "Finn," the sheriff nodded in greeting. "Got a situation in town I thought you should know about." "Edward Blackstone?" Finn asked directly. Sheriff Wilson's eyebrows rose. "So you know about him. He's been causing quite a stir, flashing money around, trying to find someone matching your house guest's description." "Miss Zimmerman is his wife," Finn explained carefully, "but she left him for good reason. She's under my protection now." The sheriff tugged at his mustache thoughtfully. "Blackstone's claiming she stole from him, says she's unstable, dangerous even." "And you believe that?" Finn's voice was dangerously quiet. "Course not," Sheriff Wilson snorted. "Known you too long to think you'd harbor a thief. Besides, I've met Blackstone now. Man's got dead eyes. Wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him." He leaned in closer. "But he's hired guns, Finn. 3 mean-looking fellows arrived on yesterday's stage. They're staying at the saloon, drinking and making threats." Finn's jaw tightened. "Thanks for the warning, Tom. What's your plan?" the sheriff asked. "Keep her safe. Make sure Blackstone understands she's not going back with him." Sheriff Wilson sighed. "I'd offer official protection, but legally, she's still his wife. The law ain't always on the woman's side in these matters." "Then we'll have to make our own justice," Finn said grimly. After the sheriff left, Finn found Lillian in the garden, helping Mrs. Abernathy gather vegetables for dinner. Seeing his expression, Mrs. Abernathy tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone. "Edward's in town," Finn said without preamble, "and he's brought men with him." Lillian's fingers tightened around the basket she held. "How many?" "3, according to the sheriff," she nodded, a strange calm settling over her. She'd been expecting this, preparing for it mentally. "What do we do now? I've been thinking about that." Finn took the basket from her hands, setting it aside. "There might be a way to protect you legally, but it's unorthodox." Lillian tilted her head questioningly. "What do you mean?" Finn took a deep breath. "Divorce laws vary by territory, but here in Montana, if a husband abandons his wife or is proven to be cruel, she can petition for divorce, with evidence and witnesses." "I have the bruises," Lillian said quietly, "and Mrs. Abernathy has seen some of them. But Edward will deny everything, and his word carries weight because of his money and connections." "There's another option," Finn continued, his eyes intent on hers. "If you were to marry someone else, but I'm already married," Lillian interrupted, confused. "In some territories, if a woman's been abandoned or abused, and she marries again in good faith, the second marriage can supersede the first, especially if the first husband doesn't immediately contest it." Lillian stared at him, understanding dawning. "You're suggesting I marry someone else to invalidate my marriage to Edward?" "Yes," Finn said simply. "Me." Shock rendered Lillian speechless for several heartbeats. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." Finn took her hands in his. "It would be a marriage of convenience, of course. To protect you legally. You would have my name, my protection, and my promise to respect your boundaries. When you're ready, if you're ever ready for more, that would be your decision entirely." Lillian pulled her hands away, turning to pace the garden path. "Finn, do you have any idea what you're suggesting? The scandal it would cause, the danger it would put you in?" "I don't give a damn about scandal," he replied calmly. "And as for danger, I'm already in it by protecting you. This would just make it official." "And what happens when Edward challenges it? When he drags us both to court?" "Then we fight," Finn said simply. "With evidence of his cruelty, with testimonies from people who have seen your fear, with every legal means available." Lillian shook her head, overwhelmed. "You can't sacrifice your future for me this way." Finn stepped closer, his expression earnest. "I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm gaining a partner, someone to share this ranch with, someone to build a future with if that's what you want too." "And if it isn't?" she challenged. "If I can never be more than a frightened woman carrying the scars of her past, then I gain a friend and the satisfaction of knowing I did the right thing." His voice softened. "Lillian, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to let me help you in the only way I know how." Tears filled her eyes. "You deserve so much better than a broken woman with another man's name." Finn's hand came up to brush a tear from her cheek. "You're not broken. Wounded, yes, but healing. And there is nothing better in this world than a woman of your courage and kindness." Lillian leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. The thought of being married again terrified her, but the thought of returning to Edward terrified her more. And somewhere beneath the fear was something new and fragile, a feeling that had been growing since the moment Finn Hayes had helped her from the dusty road. "I need time to think," she whispered. Finn nodded, dropping his hand. "Of course, but time is one thing we don't have much of. Blackstone won't wait forever." That night, Lillian couldn't sleep. She stood by her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape of the Hayes Ranch. In just a few short weeks, this place had become more of a home than the grand house she'd shared with Edward for 4 years. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Lillian, are you awake?" Mrs. Abernathy's voice called softly. "Yes, come in," Lillian replied, turning from the window. The housekeeper entered, carrying a steaming cup. "Thought you might need some chamomile tea, good for settling the nerves." Lillian accepted the cup gratefully. "Thank you. Did Finn tell you his proposal?" Mrs. Abernathy smiled knowingly. "He did. That boy never does anything by half measures." She settled into the rocking chair by the fireplace, gesturing for Lillian to sit on the bed. "What's troubling you about it?" "Besides the obvious, of course." Lillian sipped her tea, organizing her thoughts. "It's too much to ask of anyone. Marriage is sacred, not something to be entered into lightly or for convenience." "True," Mrs. Abernathy agreed. "But sometimes practical considerations must be weighed alongside romantic ones. In the old days, most marriages were arrangements of convenience that grew into love over time. And if love never grows, if I'm too damaged to ever be a proper wife to him," Mrs. Abernathy's eyes were kind but direct. "Child, do you think Finn doesn't know what he's offering? He's a grown man who's seen his share of hardship. He understands that some wounds take time to heal and some never heal completely." She leaned forward. "The question isn't whether you're worthy of his offer, it's whether you're brave enough to accept it." Lillian stared into her tea, watching the steam curl upward. "I'm so afraid, Mrs. Abernathy, not just of Edward, but of trusting anyone again." "Fear is natural," the older woman said gently. "But don't let it steal your chance at happiness." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Lillian returned to the window. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, the first hint of dawn breaking over the mountains. A new day. Perhaps a new beginning. Her decision made, Lillian dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. She found Finn in the kitchen, already awake, drinking coffee while studying a map spread on the table. "Good morning," she said softly. He looked up, surprise and pleasure lighting his features. "You're up early." "I've been thinking about your proposal," she began, her heart pounding. "It's unconventional, possibly scandalous, and definitely risky." Finn's expression grew guarded. "Yes, it is. But so is everything worth fighting for," Lillian continued, gathering her courage. "If your offer still stands, I accept." For a moment, Finn seemed frozen. Then a slow smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes and making them crinkle at the corners. "My offer definitely still stands. Before you get too pleased with yourself," Lillian added quickly, "I have conditions." "Name them," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "First, this remains a marriage of convenience unless I'm ready for more. You must promise not to expect marital rights." Finn nodded solemnly. "I would never pressure you, you have my word." "Second, I want to continue teaching. It's important to me to have my own purpose, my own income." "Of course," he agreed. "I wouldn't want you to give that up." "And third," Lillian took a deep breath, "if the time comes when you want a real marriage with a woman who can give you everything a wife should, I won't stand in your way. We can quietly arrange a dissolution." Finn stood, moving around the table to stand before her. "I accept your first 2 conditions without reservation, but the third," he shook his head, "I can't promise to ever want to end our marriage. I'm entering into this with hope for the future, Lillian. Hope that one day you might see me as more than just protection." Lillian met his steady gaze. "And if that day never comes, then I'll have the satisfaction of knowing I helped someone I care about deeply," he said simply. "And the pleasure of your friendship and companionship, which is more than many marriages ever achieve." His sincerity moved her deeply. "Very well," she conceded, "but promise me you'll tell me if you ever change your mind." "I promise," Finn said, then hesitated before adding, "I have a condition of my own." Lillian tensed slightly. "What is it?" "That you'll always be honest with me about what you're feeling. No hiding behind politeness or obligation. If something troubles you, if something I do makes you uncomfortable, you must tell me immediately." The request was so reasonable, so considerate of her feelings, that Lillian felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "I promise," Finn smiled, holding out his hand. "Then we have an agreement, Miss Zimmerman." Lillian placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses of hard work against her palm. "We do, Mr. Hayes." They were married that afternoon by the circuit judge who happened to be in Copper Creek for the monthly court session. The ceremony took place in the town's small church, with Mrs. Abernathy, Sheriff Wilson, and Mr. Daniels as witnesses. Lillian wore a simple blue dress borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy's younger days, with wildflowers from the Hayes Ranch gardens as her bouquet. The vows were traditional, spoken softly but firmly by both parties. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Finn leaned in for a chaste kiss that lasted only a moment but left Lillian's cheeks flushed. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes," he murmured, a smile playing at his lips. The name startled her. Mrs. Hayes, no longer Lillian Blackstone or even Lillian Zimmerman, a new identity, a new beginning. Their small celebration at the church was interrupted by the arrival of three rough-looking men who positioned themselves near the entrance, watching the proceedings with cold eyes. "Blackstone's men," Sheriff Wilson muttered to Finn. He must have heard about the wedding. Finn's arm tightened around Lillian's waist. "Let's get you home," he said quietly. They made it to the wagon without incident, though Lillian could feel the hired gun's eyes following their every move. Mrs. Abernathy sat with them, her expression fierce as she clutched her reticule, which, Lillian suspected, contained a small derringer. As Finn drove the wagon out of town, Lillian glanced back to see the three men mounting their horses. "They're following us," she whispered. Finn nodded grimly. "I expected as much. Don't worry. The ranch hands are waiting." Sure enough, as they approached the Hayes Ranch, 6 mounted cowboys appeared from the tree line, forming a protective barrier between the wagon and the pursuing men. The standoff was tense but brief. Outnumbered and outgunned, Blackstone's men eventually turned back toward town, but not before the leader called out, "This ain't over, Hayes. Blackstone wants his wife back, and what Blackstone wants, he gets." That evening, the ranch was like an armed camp. Men patrolled the perimeter, rifles at the ready. Inside, Finn checked and rechecked his weapons while Lillian tried to maintain a calm facade. When it came time for bed, an awkward moment ensued. Despite their agreement, they were legally married and expected to share a room. "I can sleep in one of the spare rooms," Finn offered. Lillian considered this, then shook her head. "No, that would look suspicious. If Edward challenges our marriage, we need to appear as a normal husband and wife." She straightened her shoulders. "We can share the room." "I trust you to keep your word." Finn's bedroom was large and simply furnished, with a massive oak bed that had belonged to his parents. While Finn tactfully busied himself downstairs, Lillian changed into a nightgown behind a privacy screen Mrs. Abernathy had thoughtfully provided. When Finn returned, he carried extra pillows. "I thought we could make a barrier," he explained, arranging them down the center of the bed, "to help you feel more comfortable." The consideration nearly brought tears to Lillian's eyes. Her previous husband had never once considered her comfort or feelings. They lay on opposite sides of the pillow barrier, the silence stretching between them until Lillian finally spoke. "Thank you, Finn, for everything." "You don't need to thank me," came his quiet reply in the darkness. "Yes, I do," she insisted. "Most men wouldn't do what you've done." "Then most men are fools," Finn said simply. "Good night, Lillian, good night." "Husband," she whispered, testing the word. She heard his soft intake of breath, followed by a gentle, "Good night, wife." Despite the tension of the day and the strangeness of sharing a bed, Lillian slept deeply, feeling safer than she had in years. The next morning, they established a careful routine. Finn rose early to work with the horses, while Lillian helped Mrs. Abernathy with breakfast. During the day, Lillian continued her preparations for the school term, occasionally riding out with Finn to check the herds or exercise the horses. 3 days passed without incident. Lillian began to hope that perhaps Edward had given up, that the legal protection of her new marriage had deterred him. That hope was shattered on the 4th morning when a grand carriage pulled by 4 matching black horses rolled up to the Hayes Ranch. Edward Blackstone had arrived. Finn was in the barn when one of the ranch hands burst in. "Mr. Hayes, there's a fancy carriage coming up the drive. Man inside looks like trouble." Finn grabbed his rifle. "Get Mrs. Hayes from the house. Take her to the north pasture cabin. Don't come back until you get word from me." By the time Finn reached the house, Edward Blackstone was already descending from his carriage, resplendent in an expensive tailored suit, silver-headed cane in hand. He was a tall man with aristocratic features and cold gray eyes that assessed everything as if calculating its monetary value. "Mr. Hayes, I presume?" Blackstone's voice was cultured, with an Eastern accent that seemed out of place in the Montana territory. "Mr. Blackstone," Finn acknowledged, rifle held casually but ready. "You're trespassing on private property." Blackstone's smile never reached his eyes. "I've come for my wife. I believe you're harboring her." "No, I'm not," Finn replied evenly. "My wife is currently not available." A flash of rage crossed Blackstone's face before he controlled it. "Your wife? I think you're confused, Mr. Hayes. Lillian Blackstone is my lawfully wedded wife." "Lillian Hayes is my lawfully wedded wife," Finn corrected. "We were married 3 days ago with the full blessing of the law and the church." Blackstone's knuckles whitened on his cane. "That's impossible. She's already married to me." "Not according to Montana territory law," Finn replied. "A woman abandoned or abused by her husband has grounds for immediate divorce and remarriage." Judge Parker was quite satisfied with the evidence presented. It was a bluff they hadn't actually filed divorce papers, but Blackstone wouldn't know that. "This is absurd," Blackstone sputtered. "I'll have this so-called marriage annulled immediately." "You're welcome to try," Finn said calmly, "but I suggest you do it from town. You're not welcome here." Blackstone's mask of civility slipped. "Do you have any idea who I am? What power I wield? I could buy this entire territory if I wanted." "This isn't Boston or New York," Finn said, stepping closer. "Money doesn't impress people out here as much as character does, and yours seems to be severely lacking." Blackstone's face darkened. "You'll regret this interference, Hayes." "No one takes what belongs to me." "Lillian doesn't belong to anyone," Finn replied, his voice hardening. "She's a person, not property. The fact that you can't see that difference is exactly why she left you." For a moment, Finn thought Blackstone might strike him. Instead, the man straightened his jacket and stepped back toward his carriage. "This isn't over," he warned. "Not by a long shot." After Blackstone's departure, Finn sent word for Lillian to return from the cabin. When she arrived, her face was pale with fear. "Was it Edward?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Finn nodded, taking her trembling hands in his. "He knows about our marriage." "What did he say?" "That he'd have it annulled, that I'd regret interfering." Finn squeezed her hands gently. "But he's gone for now, and we're prepared for whatever comes next." Lillian wasn't so confident. She knew Edward's determination, his vindictiveness. "He'll never let me go, Finn, not willingly." "Then we'll have to convince him," Finn said grimly. That night, as they prepared for bed, Lillian hesitated by the pillow barrier Finn had created. "May I?" She began uncertainly, then gathered her courage. "Would it be all right if we removed some of these pillows? Not all of them, just, I'd like to be able to see you, to know you're there." Finn's expression softened. "Of course." He removed several pillows, leaving just one in the center of the bed. When they lay down, they were close enough that Lillian could feel his warmth, could see the outline of his profile in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. "I'm afraid," she admitted softly. "Not of you, but of what Edward might do." Finn turned on his side to face her, careful to keep the remaining pillow between them. "I won't let him hurt you, Lillian, I promise you that. It's not just me I'm worried about," she whispered. "He could hurt you, the ranch hands, Mrs. Abernathy, anyone I care about." "We're tougher than we look," Finn said with a gentle smile. "Besides, Blackstone is a coward at heart. All bullies are. They only have power when their victims are isolated and afraid. You're not alone anymore." Lillian studied his face in the darkness, wondering how she had been fortunate enough to find this man. "No," she agreed softly. "I'm not alone anymore." On impulse, she reached across the pillow barrier, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined, a simple touch that somehow felt more intimate than any kiss. "Good night, Finn," she whispered. "Good night, Lillian," he replied, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. They fell asleep that way, connected despite the barrier between them, each drawing strength from the other's presence. The next morning, Sheriff Wilson rode out to the ranch with troubling news. Edward Blackstone had filed a formal complaint, claiming Lillian had stolen valuable jewelry and that her marriage to Finn was fraudulent. He's demanding you both appear before Judge Parker when he returns next week, the sheriff explained. Says he has evidence that Lillian was never abandoned or abused. Finn's jaw tightened. What evidence could he possibly have? Paid witnesses, most likely, the sheriff sighed. Money talks, even out here. Lillian's hands trembled as she poured coffee for the men. What can we do? Sheriff Wilson accepted the cup gratefully. Well, Judge Parker's a fair man. He'll listen to both sides, but it would help if you had witnesses of your own people who have seen evidence of Blackstone's abuse. Lillian shook her head despairingly. Edward was always careful. The servants were paid to look the other way, and we lived isolated from neighbors. Mrs. Abernathy has seen some of my bruises, but they're healing now. What about doctors? Finn asked. Surely someone treated your injuries at some point. Lillian hesitated, then nodded slowly. Once in Cheyenne. Edward beat me so badly I couldn't get out of bed for days. Our housekeeper secretly brought a doctor, Dr. Samuel Winters. He wanted me to press charges, but I was too afraid. Cheyenne's not too far, Sheriff Wilson mused. I could send a telegram, see if this doctor. Winters would be willing to testify. Hope flickered in Lillian's heart. Do you think he would remember me after 2 years? A doctor doesn't forget a badly beaten woman, the sheriff said grimly. Especially one whose husband threatened him to keep quiet, which I suspect happened. It did, Lillian confirmed. Edward found out about the doctor's visit and threatened to ruin him if he ever spoke of it. Finn stood, decision made. Send the telegram, Tom, and see if the doctor can bring any records he might have kept. After the sheriff left, Finn found Lillian in the garden, seemingly lost in thought as she pulled weeds with more force than necessary. You're going to uproot the flowers too if you keep that up, he observed gently. Lillian startled, then sat back on her heels. Sorry. I was thinking about the hearing. Finn crouched beside her. Are you worried? Terrified, she admitted. Edward can be very convincing. He'll paint me as unstable, deceitful. He might even claim I injured myself to frame him. Would Dr. Winters' testimony help? If he comes, Lillian said doubtfully. Edward's threats are not idle. The doctor could lose his practice for speaking against someone as powerful as a Blackstone. Finn took her soil-covered hand in his. Have faith, Lillian. Truth has a power of its own. For the next few days, they waited anxiously for news from Cheyenne. Lillian threw herself into preparing for the school term, as if focusing on the future could help her escape the past. Finn doubled the guards around the ranch, not trusting Blackstone to wait for legal remedies. Their evenings fell into a pattern dinner with Mrs. Abernathy, quiet conversation on the porch as the sun set, and then retirement to their shared bedroom where the pillow barrier had grown smaller each night. They never crossed that barrier, but their hands would find each other in the darkness, a lifeline of comfort and growing affection. 4 days before the scheduled hearing, Sheriff Wilson arrived with a telegram. It's from Dr. Winters, he announced, handing the paper to Lillian. Her hands shook as she read the brief message. Remember case clearly, will testify, arriving Friday, bringing records and colleague who consulted, Winters. Tears of relief sprang to her eyes. He's coming, she whispered, and he's bringing another doctor who saw me. Finn's face broke into a wide smile. That's wonderful news. There's more, Sheriff Wilson added. I've been asking around about Blackstone. Seems his reputation back east isn't as sterling as he pretends. Found 2 businessmen in town who know of him say he's ruthless, has ruined men for crossing him. They're willing to testify to his character. Hope, fragile but growing, bloomed in Lillian's heart. Perhaps they had a chance after all. That night, as they prepared for bed, Lillian found herself watching Finn as he moved around the room, removing his boots, setting his pocket watch on the dresser. Simple, domestic moments that somehow touched her deeply. Finn, she said suddenly, what happens if we win? If the judge rules in our favor and Edward has no more legal claim to me, he paused in unbuttoning his shirt. Then you're free. We stay married if that's what you want, or we can find a way to end it properly if you prefer. And what do you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Finn met her gaze directly. I want you to be happy, Lillian, whether that's with me or on your own. And if my happiness includes staying with you, not just as a convenient arrangement, but as a real marriage in time, the hope that flared in his eyes took her breath away. Then I would be the happiest man in the Montana Territory, he said simply. Lillian crossed the room to stand before him. With trembling fingers, she reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his cheek. I'm not ready for everything a marriage entails, she admitted softly. But I think I could be someday soon. With you, Finn turned his head slightly, pressing a kiss to her palm. Then I'll wait for that day, however long it takes. That night, they removed the last pillow from between them. They didn't cross the invisible line it had represented, but they slept facing each other, hands joined, breaths mingling in the quiet darkness of their shared room. The day of the hearing dawned bright and clear. Lillian dressed carefully in her best borrowed dress, a navy blue with white trim that Mrs. Abernathy had altered to fit her perfectly. Her auburn hair was arranged simply but neatly, and she wore no jewelry except the plain gold band Finn had placed on her finger during their wedding. Finn looked handsome and respectable in a clean suit, his usually unruly hair combed neatly. They made a striking couple as they rode into town in the wagon, flanked by 2 ranch hands as protection. The town hall had been converted into a makeshift courtroom for Judge Parker's monthly circuit. Already a crowd had gathered. News of the dispute between the wealthy Easterner and the respected local rancher had spread quickly. Dr. Winters had arrived the previous day and now stood waiting for them outside the hall. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a serious demeanor. Beside him stood a younger doctor who he introduced as Dr. Collins, who had consulted on Lillian's case. Mrs. Hayes, Dr. Winters greeted her formally, though his eyes showed recognition. I'm glad to see you looking well. Thank you for coming, Dr. Winters, Lillian said gratefully. I know what a risk this is for you. The doctor's expression hardened slightly. Some things are worth risking one's practice for, Mrs. Hayes. Justice is one of them. Inside, the town hall was packed with spectators. At the front, Edward Blackstone sat with a lawyer he'd brought from Denver. He looked every inch the wealthy businessman, exuding confidence and authority. When he saw Lillian enter with Finn, his eyes narrowed dangerously. Judge Parker, a stern-faced man with a reputation for fairness, called the hearing to order. He explained that this was not a formal trial, but a hearing to determine the validity of competing marriage claims and allegations of theft. Blackstone's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of Edward as a devoted husband whose mentally unstable wife had stolen valuable family heirlooms and run away. He presented 2 witnesses, Blackstone's personal secretary and a maid who testified that they had never seen Edward mistreat Lillian, and that she had often displayed hysterical behavior. When it was their turn, Finn and Lillian's lack of a formal lawyer seemed a disadvantage until Sheriff Wilson stepped forward, explaining that he would present their case as an officer of the law. Dr. Winters' testimony was devastating to Blackstone's claims. In clear, clinical language, he described the injuries Lillian had suffered 2 years earlier: 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, extensive bruising, and evidence of previous partially healed fractures. In my professional opinion, Dr. Winters concluded, these injuries were not self-inflicted, nor were they the result of accidents as I was initially told. They were consistent with severe, repeated physical abuse. Dr. Collins corroborated this assessment, adding that he had documented similar patterns of injury in other victims of domestic violence. Lillian's own testimony was painful, but delivered with quiet dignity. She described the escalating abuse, Edward's controlling behavior, and her desperate escape 3 weeks earlier. I took nothing but the clothes on my back and a small amount of money that was my own inheritance from my grandmother, she stated firmly. The jewelry Mr. Blackstone claims I stole was locked in his safe, to which I never had access. Throughout her testimony, Edward's face remained impassive, but his eyes burned with barely controlled rage. When it was his turn to speak, he portrayed himself as the wronged party, expressing concern for his poor, confused wife who needed medical attention, not freedom. I only want what's best for Lillian, he claimed smoothly. Her fragile mind has invented these allegations. I have never raised a hand to her. The businessman Sheriff Wilson had found testified to Blackstone's ruthless reputation. Mrs. Abernathy spoke of the bruises she had seen on Lillian when she first arrived at the Hayes Ranch. Finn described finding Lillian on the road, exhausted and terrified. As the testimony concluded, Judge Parker called for a brief recess to consider the evidence. Lillian sat rigidly beside Finn, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Whatever happens," Finn murmured, covering her hands with his, "we'll face it together." When Judge Parker returned, the room fell silent. He cleared his throat and delivered his ruling. "This is a troubling case with serious allegations on both sides," he began. "However, the medical evidence presented by Dr. Winters and Dr. Collins is compelling and consistent with Mrs. Hayes, formerly Mrs. Blackstone's testimony." Edward shifted angrily in his seat, but the judge continued, "I find no evidence to support the claim of theft. As for the competing marriage claims, Montana Territory law is clear. A marriage entered into in good faith by a person who has been abandoned or subjected to cruelty by a previous spouse is valid, especially when the second marriage is performed with proper license and ceremony." Lillian's heart soared as Judge Parker concluded, "Therefore, I rule that the marriage of Lillian Zimmerman Hayes to Finnegan Hayes is valid and binding. The previous marriage to Edward Blackstone is hereby dissolved on grounds of cruelty. Mr. Blackstone is ordered to cease all attempts to contact or reclaim Mrs. Hayes." A murmur ran through the crowd. Lillian felt light-headed with relief, barely registering Finn's arm around her shoulders, steadying her. Edward Blackstone stood abruptly, his face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. You can't possibly, Mr. Blackstone," Judge Parker interrupted sternly. "My ruling is final. I strongly suggest you accept it and return to wherever you came from. Should you continue to harass Mrs. Hayes or attempt to interfere with her life here, you will face criminal charges." For a moment, it seemed Edward might explode with fury. Then, with visible effort, he controlled himself, turning cold eyes toward Lillian. "This isn't over," he said quietly, so only she and Finn could hear. "You belong to me, always." "No, Edward," Lillian replied, finding strength in Finn's presence beside her. "I don't belong to you, I never did, and I never will again." Edward's nostrils flared, but with a final venomous glare, he turned and stormed out of the town hall, his lawyer and witnesses hurrying after him. The crowd erupted in conversation as people began to disperse. Friends and neighbors came forward to congratulate Finn and Lillian, while Dr. Winters shook Finn's hand firmly. "Take care of her," the doctor said simply. "She deserves happiness after what she's endured." "I intend to," Finn promised. Sheriff Wilson approached with a satisfied smile. "Blackstone and his men are packing up to leave on the afternoon stage. I'll have deputies keep an eye on them until they're gone." "Thank you, Tom," Finn said gratefully, "for everything." As they prepared to return to the ranch, Lillian pulled Finn aside, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's really over," she whispered. "I'm free." Finn nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Yes, you are, free to choose your own path forward." Lillian's hand found his, fingers intertwining. "I already have." The ride back to the ranch was filled with a lightness neither had felt before. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, but free from the dark shadow that had been hanging over them. Mrs. Abernathy prepared a special dinner to celebrate, inviting the ranch hands to join them. Toasts were made, stories shared, and for the first time since arriving at the Hayes Ranch, Lillian laughed without reservation, the weight of fear finally lifted from her shoulders. That night, as they prepared for bed, the atmosphere between them had changed. There was no pillow barrier, no invisible line dividing the mattress, just two people who had fought a battle together and emerged victorious. "Finn," Lillian said softly as they lay facing each other in the darkness, "I want to thank you for everything you've done. Not just the marriage, not just today's hearing, but for truly seeing me when I couldn't even see myself clearly." Finn reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "You don't need to thank me for that. Seeing you, the real you, beneath the fear and pain has been the easiest thing I've ever done." Lillian caught his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. "I'm not ready for everything yet," she admitted, but I'd like to try to be closer." Understanding her meaning, Finn opened his arms. Lillian moved into his embrace, her head resting on his chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. His arms encircled her gently, protectively, but without possessiveness. "Is this all right?" he murmured against her hair. "It's perfect," she whispered, feeling safer than she ever had before. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's warmth, the first step toward healing the wounds of the past and building something new together. The next morning, Lillian woke still nestled in Finn's arms. For a moment, panic threatened as old memories surfaced, but it quickly subsided as she remembered where she was and who she was with. Finn's even breathing told her he was still asleep, and she took the opportunity to study his face, relaxed in slumber. She had married him for protection, for safety from Edward. But somewhere along the way, her feelings had transformed into something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. As if sensing her gaze, Finn's eyes fluttered open. He smiled sleepily, his arms loosening to give her space if she needed it. "Good morning," he murmured. "Good morning," she replied, surprised by the shyness in her voice. Finn searched her face. "Any regrets?" Lillian shook her head. "No, you," his smile deepened. "Not a single one." Later that morning, as Lillian helped Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast, the housekeeper observed her with a knowing smile. "You look different today," she commented. Lillian felt herself blushing. "Do I? Lighter, like you've finally set down a heavy burden." "I have," Lillian agreed, kneading dough for biscuits with newfound energy. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe freely." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "And how are things with you and Finn?" Lillian's blush deepened. "We're finding our way." "Good," the older woman said simply. "That boy deserves happiness, so do you." The next month passed in a blur of activity. School began, and Lillian threw herself into teaching with enthusiasm that quickly endeared her to her students. Every morning, Finn would drive her to the schoolhouse in town, and every afternoon he or one of the ranch hands would pick her up. At home, their relationship continued to evolve slowly, respectfully. Gentle touches became more frequent, kisses more natural. They learned each other's rhythms, preferences, fears. Lillian discovered that Finn loved poetry but was embarrassed to admit it. Finn learned that Lillian had a hidden talent for sketching, particularly horses. One evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the mountains, they sat before the fire in the parlor. Finn was reading aloud from a volume of Tennyson while Lillian sketched him, trying to capture the way the firelight played across his features. "May I see?" he asked, noticing her frequent glances. Lillian hesitated, then handed him the sketchbook. Finn studied the drawing, his expression softening. "Is that really how you see me?" he asked quietly. She looked at the sketch. Finn, with his head bent over the book, his profile strong but gentle, his eyes thoughtful. "Yes," she replied simply. Finn set the sketchbook aside and moved to kneel before her chair. "Lillian," he began, taking her hands in his, "I know our marriage began as an arrangement, but for me it has become so much more." Lillian's heart quickened. "For me too," she whispered. "I love you," Finn said, the words simple but profound. "I don't expect you to say it back. I know you're still healing, still finding your way, but I wanted you to know." Tears filled Lillian's eyes. Love was a word Edward had used as a weapon, a justification for control and cruelty. But from Finn's lips, it sounded different, a gift offered without expectation, a truth stated without demand. "I think," she said slowly, carefully, "that I may be falling in love with you too. I'm just not sure I know how to do it properly anymore." Finn smiled, reaching up to brush away a tear that had escaped. "There is no properly, there's just us, finding our way together." That night, for the first time, they shared more than just the space of their bed. With infinite patience and tenderness, Finn showed Lillian that physical love could be beautiful, respectful, and healing. That her body was her own to share, not something to be taken or used. That pleasure was meant to be mutual, never one-sided. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Lillian felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. The ghosts of Edward's touch hadn't been completely exorcised. Such healing would take time, but Finn's love had begun to wash away the stains her first husband had left on her soul. "I love you," she whispered against Finn's shoulder, the words feeling right, true. His arms tightened around her. And I love you, Lillian Hayes, with all that I am. Spring came to the Montana Territory, painting the Hayes Ranch in vibrant greens and wildflower blooms. The foal Hope had grown into a spirited yearling who followed Lillian around like a puppy whenever she visited the paddock. One warm Sunday afternoon, Finn suggested a ride to a special place he wanted to show her. They saddled their horses midnight for Finn, and a gentle bay mare named Daisy for Lillian, and rode into the foothills beyond the ranch. After an hour's ride, they crested a hill to find a breathtaking vista spread before them, a crystal-clear lake nestled among pine trees, with the mountains rising majestically beyond. "It's beautiful," Lillian gasped, dismounting to take in the view. "My father proposed to my mother here," Finn said, joining her at the lakeside. "He always said it was the most perfect place on earth." Lillian smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I can see why." Finn seemed uncharacteristically nervous, shifting from foot to foot. "I brought you here for a reason," he admitted finally. "Oh," Lillian turned to him, curious. Finn took her hands in his. "I know we're already married, but that was an arrangement born of necessity, not choice. Now that you're truly free, now that we've had time to know each other, to love each other." He dropped to one knee, looking up at her with such love it made her breath catch. "Lillian Hayes, would you marry me again? Not out of need or protection, but because we choose each other freely and completely." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks as joy bubbled up within her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Finn rose, gathering her in his arms for a kiss that spoke of promises kept and promises yet to be made. They renewed their vows 2 weeks later, in the same church where they had first married. This time, the small building was filled with friends, students, ranch hands, and townspeople who had come to respect and love the Hayes family. Lillian wore a new dress of ivory satin, and Mrs. Abernathy wept openly as the couple spoke vows they had written themselves. No longer promises made in desperation, but commitments offered in love and hope. "I, Finnegan Hayes, take you, Lillian, not as my protection or my duty, but as my heart's choice. I promise to love you freely, to respect your strength, to support your dreams, and to walk beside you never ahead or behind for all the days of our lives." Lillian's voice was clear and strong as she responded. "I, Lillian Hayes, take you, Finnegan, as my partner, my lover, and my truest friend. I promise to trust in your goodness, to believe in our future, to share my whole self with you, fears, dreams, and all that lies between for as long as we both shall live." The celebration afterward was joyous music and dancing in the town square, food and laughter shared among friends who had become family. As night fell, Finn led Lillian in a waltz beneath lantern light, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes." He murmured against her ear. Lillian smiled up at him, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible, Mr. Hayes." Later that night, as they lay in each other's arms in the bedroom that had become truly theirs, Lillian traced the line of Finn's jaw with gentle fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For washing away what they did, for seeing the woman beneath the fear, for loving me back to life." Finn captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Thank you for being brave enough to trust again, for choosing to stay, for teaching me what love really means." Outside their window, the Montana night stretched vast and peaceful, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Inside, two hearts beat as one, a testament to love's power to heal, to transform, to redeem. And in that quiet moment, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that she was clean enough, whole enough, and loved enough not because Finn had declared it so, but because she had finally come to believe it herself. 5 years later, the Hayes Ranch had prospered beyond all expectations. Finn's reputation for breeding and training the finest horses in the territory had spread, bringing buyers from as far as California and Texas. Lillian continued teaching, having expanded the one-room schoolhouse into a proper school with 3 teachers and over 60 students. Their family had grown as well. 3-year-old Margaret, named for Lillian's mother, had Finn's blue eyes and Lillian's auburn hair. Her baby brother, Henry, just learning to walk, was the spitting image of his father. On the anniversary of their second wedding, Finn presented Lillian with a gift, the deed to a piece of land adjacent to the school, where he proposed to build a proper library for the town. The Lillian Hayes Memorial Library. She read from the plans, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not dead yet, Finn Hayes," he laughed, drawing her into his arms. "Fine, we'll drop the memorial part, but I want your name on it because without you, half the children in this town wouldn't know the joy of reading." Their life wasn't without challenges. There had been hard winters, crop failures, economic downturns. They had suffered the loss of Mrs. Abernathy to influenza, mourning her as the mother figure she had become to both of them. But through it all, their love had only deepened, strengthened by each obstacle overcome together. Edward Blackstone had made one more attempt to reclaim Lillian, sending hired guns to the ranch a year after the hearing. But Finn and his men had been prepared, and the would-be kidnappers had been captured and turned over to the sheriff. After that, word came that Blackstone had returned to Boston, eventually remarrying a society woman who, Lillian prayed, would be strong enough to escape his cruelty. The scars of her first marriage hadn't completely faded. Lillian still had nightmares occasionally, still flinched at unexpected loud noises. But they came less frequently now, overshadowed by the joy and security of her life with Finn. On a warm summer evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play with the foal of Hope's first offspring, Finn took Lillian's hand in his. "Do you ever think about how we started?" he asked. "How close we came to never meeting at all?" Lillian nodded, squeezing his hand. "I think about it often, if I'd taken a different road, if you hadn't been riding by at that exact moment." "I used to think it was chance," Finn mused. "Now I believe it was something more, fate, destiny, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it." "Perhaps," Lillian agreed. Or perhaps it was simply that two souls who needed each other somehow found their way to the same dusty road at the same moment in time. Finn smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "However it happened, I thank God for it every day." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant golds and purples, Lillian Hayes looked at the life she had built from the ashes of her past: a loving husband, beautiful children, meaningful work, and a community that had embraced her as one of their own. She had once believed herself too stained, too damaged for genuine love. But Finn Hayes had shown her a profound truth: that love, real love, didn't demand perfection. It simply offered acceptance, patience, and unwavering support. "I love you," she murmured, leaning against his shoulder. "And I love you," he replied, the words as fresh and heartfelt as the first time he had spoken them. In the distance, little Margaret chased a butterfly while Henry tottered after her on unsteady legs. The horses grazed peacefully in the paddock, and the ranch house stood solid and welcoming against the backdrop of the Montana wilderness. It wasn't a perfect life, no life ever is, but it was theirs. Built on trust, strengthened by trials, and sustained by a love that had begun with an act of kindness on a dusty road and grown into something neither could have imagined. And for Lillian Hayes, once broken but now whole, that was more than enough. It was everything.